welcome to my thoughts and impressions on the final preview of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Square Enix were kind enough to once again invite me out to get 3 to 4 hours worth of hands-on time with the game as part of the final preview. Before we dive in, there's a few things I'd like to preface, the first of which is that narrative spoilers will be kept to a minimum. I'll be intentionally vague about certain aspects of the story to try and preserve that overall experience for you. Though if you've been keeping up with the latest news or have played the original Final Fantasy VII, you'll likely know where the story currently is at during this gameplay. Having said that, I will be thoroughly explaining and diving into some of the game's mechanics, so consider that a warning. The only other point I'd like to make note of is that I played this game on the dynamic difficulty, where the game roughly scales with how well or how bad you're playing, and that I played the game on performance mode, and for the most part, the performance mode was pretty smooth. Visually, the game did look a little soft at times, particularly during combat when things were quite fast-paced and frenetic, but overall I found it manageable. That being said, this is a test build, so it may not be indicative of the game's final quality. With all that said and done, let's finally dive in. Here's a quick rundown of what we'll be covering in today's video. The party level system, how that ties into the new Folio system, the return of the relationship system, weapon skills and upgrades and how they differ from what was seen in Remake, the return of the proficiency and ability system, the addictively fun card minigame Queen's Blood, before giving you my thoughts on the open world, the Midgardsormr boss fight, the new summon sanctuaries, and the enigmatic Protorelics. As an aside, if you're interested in more Final Fantasy VII Rebirth content, then definitely like this video and subscribe, as there's plenty more on the way. My time with Rebirth was split into 2 distinct sections, the first of which I'm not allowed to talk about or show you, otherwise Square would absolutely have my head, so we'll skip right past that and move on to what I can talk about, which was Chapter 2, which finds the party situated in the town of Kalm, which if you've seen the cutscene at the end of FF7 Remake Integrate, will make a whole lot of sense. Stepping out onto the streets of Kalm for the first time, Square Enix have done a fantastic job of making this town feel alive. From the large scale of the town itself with all its different verticalities, to the bustling nature of its NPCs which are packed densely seemingly no matter where you are in the town. It feels much like the town in the original, despite being several magnitudes larger. With a backdrop of Kalm in place, the game now takes the time to further tutorialize the player on different aspects that you want to pay attention to. The first of which is the new party level mechanic. This level is entirely separate and does not correlate to the level of the members of your party. This level specifically will rise when completing things like side quests or specific in-game challenges. The game also mentions that you'll be able to increase your party level by exploring the world as well. Though we didn't get to see the party level rise all too much when I played, I figure it's fairly important as it directly ties into the new Folio system, which is worth talking about. By visiting a Magnata bookstore somewhere in town or finding a Magnata automat out in the open world, players can spend accrued SP or skill points on skill cores, which effectively allow you to gain new skills. In this instance, a lot of them tend to be synergy abilities that you're able to use with other members of your party. Characters earn SP or skill points anytime that they level up, or when they find manuscripts somewhere out in the open world. If you've played FF7 Remake, this will likely sound familiar. Once you spend your points on a skill core, an adjacent skill core will then be unlocked. However, the only way to create new skill cores and gain access to new abilities is by increasing that overall party level. Each party member has their own set of skill cores, and it's also worth mentioning that you're able to reset any of your skill points spent, allowing you to try out new skill cores and see what does and what does not fit your current playstyle. Moving away from skills and abilities entirely for just a second, let's talk about the relationship system, as I imagine a lot of you are probably going to be curious. The system this time appears to be far more overt and in your face than in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Throughout my time in Kalm, I found several of my party members situated around town, and when engaged with a conversation with them, they often give you a branching path for you to respond with. By choosing a more favorable response, you're able to strengthen the bond with that specific party member, with them responding in kind based on how you reply to them. Though we didn't get to see the overall impact of these outcomes in the demo that I played, the game does promise that the strength of your bonds with your party members can indeed alter portions of the story. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that this might be referring to a particular scene that occurs in the Gold Saucer. All in all, it seems like a fun way to give the player a bit of agency, allowing them to respond to their party members in specific sequences however they want to. It also serves as a little bit of a test to see how well you know your party members by attempting to guess what they might respond to favorably. Continuing to bumble my way through the streets of Kalm, going for a swim because it felt too hot, and rolling into people just because I could, I eventually stumble upon my next objective, the weapons store. The first thing I do is promptly start selling all of the items I have, because I want to buy this sleek saber, primarily because I like its unique Firebolt blade ability. FF7 Remake's weapon proficiency system makes a return here in Rebirth, whereby continuously using a ability that's unique to only one weapon and maxing out its proficiency, you'll then be able to use that ability regardless of whatever weapon you have equipped. What's different about the weapon upgrade system here in Rebirth, however, is the whole node system. By simply accruing SP or skill points, much like the Folio system either through leveling up or finding manuscripts, your overall weapon level will begin to rise. Despite its name, a party member's weapon level is not specific to whatever weapon they have equipped. The weapon level is shared across all weapons that party member is able to use. This can be seen here as Cloud's Buster Sword and Sleek Saber both share the same weapon level, despite me using the Sleek Saber far more. Whenever you gain a weapon level, you'll unlock a new weapon skill alongside a statistical boost. Weapon skills are seemingly unique to each weapon to help differentiate them, and you can unlock new nodes on a weapon to slot weapon skills into by simply raising your weapon level. This is overall a welcome addition. It adds a nice new layer to the game's mechanics, allowing you to further optimize your setup. Most importantly, navigating through this menu is nice, snappy, and quick. A far cry from Remake's weapon upgrade menu, which was pleasant to look at, though oftentimes felt cumbersome to move through and took forever to load up. Though trivial, it's great to see that that's been rectified in Rebirth with just a simple menu. Before I continue talking about the rest of our escapades in Kalm and in the open world, I really have to talk about Queen's Blood, the brand new card minigame that's been introduced in Rebirth. You're immediately given the starting deck of cards the moment Chapter 2 begins before you're thrust out into Kalm, allowing you to tackle 3 separate opponents. Defeating each of these opponents allows you to raise your overall Queen's Blood level, alongside netting you a new card. All of the cards, as you can see here, are basically based off of classic Final Fantasy VII enemies. You are able to customize your own deck should you wish to, but I found that for these first 3 opponents, I didn't need to do that at all. And the minigame itself is rather straightforward. There are essentially 3 lanes of play that you and your opponent are able to put cards down onto. Once you've placed a card, its power is added to your overall lane total, the power of the card being noted in the top right hand side of it. The yellow tiles that you see in the middle of a card denote what new positions will be opened up on the board where you're able to place future cards once you've placed that initial card down. These are physically denoted on the game board with emerald pawns for where you can place your cards and the ruby pawns for where your enemy can place their card. By placing cards down and overlapping these yellow tiles, you'll be able to raise the rank of a specific position, denoted by increasing the amount of pawns on that particular tile. The more useful and powerful a card is, the higher the rank needed to play it on the board. You can see the rank required to play a card on the top left hand side. It's always worth mulliganing or swapping out cards in your starting hand that have a high rank requirement, as you're not going to be able to play them until you're well into the match anyway. Having had enough of Queen's Blood and bumbling around town, I finally made my way to my main objective, which was the clock tower, where I was supposed to share a touching moment with Aerith. The sky was fair, the winds were sweeping just right, and a beautiful vista served as the backdrop, only for that illusion to be absolutely shattered with Shinra at our backs. All out of options, we find ourselves thrust into a forced stealth sequence as we skirt around the rooftops of Kalm. It certainly made for a nice change of pace, being able to see the town from up above, but before I knew it, the stealth sequence was pretty much over as we reunited with the party and hightailed it out of Kalm. And that brings us onto the more open world section of the demo that I played. The vastness and sense of scale of this game is definitely not to be understated. I pretty much just picked random things I found on the horizon and went towards them. The first landmark I set my sights upon was Thorin's card shop. Unfortunately, they weren't in, so I couldn't necessarily buy anything, but I can imagine this has something to do with the Queen's Blood card game. I then picked a new target on the horizon and off I went. I think it's great that they finally added in a button for traversal that allows you to hop, skip, and jump all manner of rocks and ledges, alongside climbing things like cliff faces. It certainly would have felt incredibly restrictive and linear if we were only able to traverse to specific regions by simply following a well-beaten path. I eventually found myself at my chosen landmark, the Windmill Settlement. And though there wasn't necessarily anything to do here for the time being, at least I felt as though I had accomplished something by picking something to go to and making my way over there. Realizing that I probably should get a move on as I don't have an infinite amount of time in the game, I inevitably made my way to the next quest marker. Forging ever onward, we end up stumbling upon Chocobo Bill in the middle of nowhere, who unfortunately is stuck as his truck is broken down. We're inevitably directed to a dock down the road that just so happens to feature an infamous swamp nearby. The party even find a poster telling people to beware of the Midgardsormr that lurks beneath the waters of the swamp. And so the name Midgardsormr is no more. It looks as though they finally fixed the mistranslation that was present in the original and that has been used ever since. Following this quest sequence to its natural conclusion, it ultimately led us to another sequence that we've seen in previous gameplay builds, where we retrace our steps and head off to the Chocobo farm in need of some guidance. Before long, we were stalking and wrestling ourselves up our own Chocobo, and with a new means of transportation in hand, we made our way back to the swamp. The transition from a verdant, lush green forest to a dark, drab and depressive swamp was almost seamless. The swamp in the original FF7 wasn't necessarily anything to write home about, though it did do a good job of making things appear quite barren, but they really have seemed to step it up a notch here for Rebirth. Whilst we're in the vicinity of the swamp and in the swamp itself, it really felt like the life had been sucked out of everything, giving us this desaturated, dark, muted green look to pretty much everything. Before I could take in any more of the oppressive atmosphere, however, the team had found themselves in a spot of bother. The Midgardsormr that we'd seen warning signs for pretty much everywhere had finally made its appearance, thrusting us into a boss fight. I think I can let the footage here speak for itself when I say that they really did outdo themselves when it came to the enemy design. It may have received an HD facelift, but it still is an absolute menace, one that can take you out quite quickly if you don't stay on your toes and strategize properly. Though we do have a bit of an advantage here, as the game does take the time to tell you about raising your limit levels. Essentially, you're able to perform even stronger limit breaks than you normally would by using specific synergy abilities beforehand to raise your limit level, with some of the higher tier limit breaks being locked behind the Folio system. The Midgardsormr made for a great adversary, and just when we were reaching the crescendo of the fight, Sephiroth comes in to steal the spotlight, recreating a rather iconic scene from the original FF7. One trivial but cool detail that I liked was the fact that after you beat the Midgardsormr, you got a notification to let you know that you're now able to swim safely through the swamplands instead of having to use a chocobo. And just as I'd finished celebrating my victory, my time with the demo came to a swift end. With that said, however, let's cover some of the things that I missed that you'll be able to do when you get hands-on with the game. The first of which are summon sanctuaries. Throughout the open world, sometimes you'll find paths littered with guide stones, and effectively breaking these guide stones will release a light that you'll need to follow to be able to find this hidden sanctuary. Inside the sanctuary, you'll find a summon crystal that corresponds to a very specific summon, where you'll then have to complete a memorization minigame, which if done correctly, will weaken the summon in Chadley's combat simulator. Much like some of the summons from FF7 Remake, you'll have to face off against them in a combat simulator, where successfully defeating them will net you their summon materia. Whilst we're on the topic of Chadley and the combat simulator, each member of your party will now have their own combat training, dedicated to all of their unique skills and abilities to help players get accustomed to just how they work. Considering the 4-year gap between Remake and Rebirth, and some of the smaller additions or changes they've made to some of the characters, it definitely is a welcome addition. The last new but mysterious feature that I want to touch upon are the Protorelics. We got a small glimpse of this seemingly long-spanning questline that features Beck's badasses from FF7 Remake, where after traipsing from location to location and besting them for a final time, we get our hands on a Protorelic, and then we spot a rather mysterious figure. I won't say who or what exactly this is, other than if you've played other Final Fantasies, this figure should seem very, very familiar. And if that's what they're teasing openly now, who knows what else they have lying in wait that we have yet to discover. And that conveniently brings me to my verdict on the final preview of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It feels as though Rebirth is going to be the sequel that is bigger and better than its predecessor, addressing a lot of the complaints people have had surrounding Remake, particularly about things like the linearity of it, the fact that you're constantly squeezing through corridors every 5 minutes, or even some of the minor complaints people had surrounding the combat. Alongside that, the narrative itself still holds a lot of intrigue. Will they or won't they follow closely to the original FF7? I'm going to stop myself right there before I go off into a theoretical tangent about the game's narrative, but what I can definitively say is that I really did enjoy my time with the game. Rest assured that once I do get my hands on the game, I'll definitely be putting a full review out there, and I'm interested to see whether or not there'll be any disparity between my opinion now and my opinion after completing the game. But that about wraps it up for my final preview of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Definitely one of my most hotly anticipated games for 2024, and I can't wait to dive into the full thing when it releases on February 29th. Again, if you enjoyed today's video, do be sure to leave a like and subscribe, as there's plenty more FF7 Rebirth content on the way. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.